Subscribe.
If it's appropriate to contact a planet openly, they will try to help that civilization solve their technological issues, but in a way that's not like, we're just here to give you answers and just here's our technology. Our technology has far surpassed our level of consciousness. And so we're abusing technology and using it for very destructive means.
Bashar has talked about exactly what you're saying, that nuclear weapons specifically have the ability to affect life on different planes of existence. So when you drop a nuke, you could kill and affect life in dimensions that have nothing to do with us.
I can tell you for a fact, TLS does have certain boxes that act as like Tesla free energy.
I know personally some people that work with this individual to get instructions on how to create free energy.
I'm Jason Shurka, and this is Hidden Revelations. Welcome back to Hidden Revelations. I'm your host, Jason Shurka. Sitting alongside me is Brandon Bozarth and Aaron Abke. In this episode, episode 3, we're going to be speaking all about secrecy and the freedom of choice. So, big picture. Secrecy nowadays has this really sort of dark idea around it. It's associated with evil people, evil organizations. We keep things a secret to suppress the people. And that is an absolute reality on one side of the coin. But there's a whole other side of the coin, a whole other reality associated with secrecy that isn't spoken about so much. And that's the fact that collectively, maybe there are some things that we are just not ready for. And in that way, holding things in secrecy may actually be to our benefit for the collective of humanity instead of to oppress humanity. It's almost like not giving a child a car to drive when that child is 8 years old. They may be able to reach the gas and the brakes, but they may crash. They may hurt people along the way because they're just not ready. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It just is. So today we're going to be connecting this idea of secrecy and how secrecy in many ways can preserve the freedom of choice, connected to the pyramid code, the law of one, the Bashar material, and maybe some other texts that come along the way. So with that being said, before we continue bringing in some excerpts from these sacred texts, why don't we start with just our thoughts on secrecy and the freedom of choice in sort of the big picture aspect of it?
Yeah, this is a big part of the law of one that's called the law of confusion. And Ra refers to this many times in the text as really they call it the first distortion of the law of one. In that it's what allows the positive path, at least, to preserve free will in whoever they're interacting with. So they will often say, if they're asked a question, can you tell us about XYZ? If they believe that that's an infringement in some way, they'll say, this breaks the law of confusion. And so I very much agree with what you had to say in that it can be just as detrimental in the way that we see, the negative polarity uses secrecy to hide and cover up their agenda of service to self. We can see it being just as detrimental if it's abused in the positive polarity by giving someone too much too soon before they're ready for it.
Yeah, it's really good. Bashar talks about relevancy and appropriateness. And like you said, with the car analogy, all of the extraterrestrial races have some form of free energy. So would you give free energy to a society that is currently killing each other, and has for the last 100 years? So they are, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little bit, so I'll save some of it, but they are plugged into a higher intelligence where they can see the big picture. It's like being on the mountaintop and being able to see a multitude of variables all interacting, almost like from the higher mind perspective. So they're operating, and Bashar, I'll explain more later in this episode, but Bashar explains how they only allow themselves to access information if the information unto of itself is relevant and appropriate. Mm-hmm. So when someone asks Bashar, can you answer this? If it's not appropriate, Bashar will not receive the information because Bashar is in an agreement with his higher mind that says, I'm going to keep information that is inappropriate, and I'm going to take cues from their higher mind, and we're having conversations on this level to decide what information is appropriate for this individual. And because Bashar's civilization is so transparent, because they're so evolved, the ego cannot get in the way of that. It can't say, oh man, I'm lacking information, or, oh, well, maybe I'll make something up, or it's just, they are in 100% knowing and service of that higher intelligence.
Absolutely. So on the other side of that coin is also sometimes people do hold information and they simply, through the freedom of choice to preserve our freedom of choice collectively, don't let that out. And sometimes people are like, well, why would you do that? Why would you not give us something if you have something so powerful? And the free energy analogy was a really good example of that. There's a lot of talk, especially when it comes to the pyramid code, rays of light, TLS, when it comes to codes and documents being encrypted with certain codes, whether it's the pyramid code, rays of light, that book that will come out eventually, the Old Testament, and many other books that are out there that are encrypted and have these codes embedded within them that are pretty much a form of technology.
Yeah.
And in the pyramid code, there's actually a portion that says the following. The pyramid code was not a secret at this point in time, referring to ancient Egypt.
Right.
As time passed, it turned to become a secret since the pharaoh rulers abused the power given to them and were no longer to be trusted. And the reason why that's so relevant in today's day is just like the free energy example. If something is given right now that certain people will abuse, then although it exists and although it can do incredible work and help us progress incredibly very, very quickly, it may not be the best time to do it. And that's where I would say secrecy probably holds a really powerful and positive hold in regards to how it's being exercised. And in many cases, that's how TLS does their things, where I know that TLS and I know Ray does have certain codes. I mean, they wrote these documents according to the knowledge of these codes. And I don't have the codes, but to my knowledge of them, one who does understand and is taught these codes, you can pretty much see it as like a form of technology. When you gain access to that, it gives you a very, very wide level of power. And if that power falls into the wrong hands, it can be abused, just like it was 3,000-4,000 years ago by the pharaohs. And I'm sure many other societies even further back then. So I see this time in modern day as being a repetition of history and us learning from the mistakes that we did in the past to make sure they don't repeat themselves once again.
Right.
So with that being said, in Rays of Light, the text that is not yet out in its entirety, but is coming out in portions and hopefully will come out sooner rather than later. There's a portion that really speaks to me in regards to freedom of choice, how that works and how that's exercised to really help us instead of hurt us. And the line goes as follows. In Rays of Light, it says, the freedom of choice is yours. And if I prove anything to you in advance, if I give you all the elements of the universe and its secrets, without any work done on your end, your freedom of choice will no longer be a free choice, but a biased choice. And I bring that up now because I know in the law of one, there are many portions where they ask a question and there is no answer.
Oh, yeah.
Can you speak more about that in regards to the material and the freedom of choice?
Yeah. Well, I think the important part about this topic is that the creator's trying to have an organic experience of itself. And so if somebody else gives me knowledge that I haven't learned through my own lived experience yet, that's what's considered infringement. And I can actually make decisions based on information I haven't experienced for myself that might actually slow down or interfere with my own evolution. And so that's why the positive polarity not only honors and protects free will, but is actually polarizes by doing so. So when positive social memory complexes which is the word for basically a group mind. As civilizations evolve telepathy, they have the ability where everyone can share thoughts amongst each other. So that's where free will or free choice becomes very different once we can access all of one another's mind and thoughts equally. Because now I basically have learned all the lessons you've learned. And so our mind becomes much greater in its capacity and the abilities that we can perform together. So in the fourth density, positive social memory complexes will travel through the galaxy looking for planets, specifically third density planets like ours, who are in these transition periods where, our technology has far surpassed our level of consciousness. And so we're abusing technology and using it for very destructive means and selfish means. And so they will come along, and if it's appropriate to contact a planet openly, they will try to help that civilization solve their technological issues, but in a way that's not like, we're just here to give you answers and just here's our technology, just do what you will with it, but to help them learn and understand and grow. Whereas the negative path polarizes, as we said in the last episode, by coercing and manipulating free will into its possession. So they will look for planets they can go to and basically say they need free choice as well to polarize. So they'll say, we have come from far away to be your saviors. The universe is a dark, scary place full of danger and mystery. And, you're in jeopardy of the dangers of the universe, but we can protect you. We can help you. Just, give us your power, sort of serve us, and we will make you great and powerful like us. And if a planet says, wow, look at these great, powerful beings, we want to be like you, we want your technology, then that's a form of enslavement where we allow them, sort of like a socialist or communist society, the people give all of their power over freely to the government to sort of be their masters. And that's what will allow the negative path to polarize. So it really is free will is really the elixir of the universe in that sense.
I have a question for you, and I think you're also probably going to have an answer for this one, but there's a lot of talks when it comes to certain things that we can infringe on, and like the universal laws, one being like nuclear warfare.
Right.
Whereas other things like elections, you don't touch. You let that whole thing play out. What would you say the difference is? Why can we stop a nuclear bomb or something of that nature and not something else that's detrimental to humanity? Where does that line of differentiation exist?
I have a good nuclear example, but if you have something, Aaron, you can start it off.
Yeah, where I was going to go with it is the examples we've seen, and there's these have been, I believe, declassified by the military now. Back in the 50s, I think 1947 is when the Roswell crash happened, because we had just launched the first atom bomb, I think, and we saw a huge amount of UFO activity back then. Because this is just my opinion on it, but the positive polarity will step in to stop, let's say, the negative polarity or a service to self-action by a powerful world leader or something. If it's going to infringe to such a degree on the free will of all these living beings, they may actually step in and say, it's a greater infringement if we allow this to happen than if we don't. And so in the case of an election, maybe a corrupt politician will be elected, but no one's going to lose their life. There's not going to be a huge amount of death and suffering, right? But in the case of a nuclear bomb, that could wipe out an entire country. Millions of people could die from one man's decision to press a button. Yeah. So you might see, as we have seen, there's the famous story. I can't remember the name of the general who tells this story, but they were watching the missile launch, and they say the warhead goes up. Oh yeah, and a UFO appears. Yeah. A craft appears to the left. He said it fired a beam of light. It appeared below, fired a beam of light up to the left, and from the top fired down. And the warhead was just deactivated and it fell down to earth and didn't detonate upon landing. And many instances like that have happened where they try to launch and all of a sudden there's UFO activity or something.
They scramble the codes
and they can't launch the warheads. And it's sort of, I believe, the positive ETs here being like, we're not going to let you, sort of like a child, if it was playing with a dangerous toy or a weapon, you would be like, I'm just not going to let you play with that.
Right. Yeah, that's really good.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Bashar's talked about exactly what you're saying, that nuclear weapons specifically have the ability to affect life on different planes of existence. So when you drop a nuke, you're not just harming the area in our physical reality. Right. It's actually, it's such a massive burst of energy that it's actually going into different dimensions, and it could kill and affect life in dimensions that have nothing to do with us. So that's one of the primary reasons is you're going to affect things on levels you're not even aware of, and we simply can't allow that.
Yeah, we're like a child playing with fire. We don't even know what we're tampering with.
Exactly.
That actually makes sense, because even if you look at the nuclear bomb itself, from my basic understanding of the nuclear bomb, it's pretty much like two atoms colliding.
Exactly.
And that's already
That's
on a really deep level in terms of dimensionality.
Yes.
So the repercussions of that, I mean, again, I'm no scientist, but it just would probably make sense that it completely extends far beyond the range of anything that we understand in our sort of waking reality of experience and understanding.
I want to give an example about free energy, what we referenced earlier, and why extraterrestrials may be keeping that outside of the harm we could do from it.
And by the way, I will say that I could tell you for a fact, TLS does have certain boxes that act as like the Tesla free energy.
Very cool.
Literally boxes.
Yeah. And I have a lot of cool stuff to talk about with Tesla that Bashar has confirmed, which we'll put a pin in that.
Sure.
So I won't name any names, but a certain very famous scientist, more like a metaphysics scientist. I know personally, because I've met some people that work with this individual, work with Bashar in private sessions for many, many years to get instructions on how to create free energy. Now, they're doing it. It involves spinning noble gas. I think we've talked about noble gas. And
what is noble gas?
What I know about noble gas, it's a natural element, and it, like neon, is an example of a noble gas.
Okay.
And what's unique about them is, I'll have to do more research, but I believe they put off energy without losing energy. And when you spin them, they create some sort of field.
It sounds like a torus.
Something,
where it's what it gives out, it brings in.
Does it generate its own gravity?
Maybe that was it.
Element 115, Bob Lazar talked about, is a stable element that generates its own gravity.
If they stabilize it, that's the whole thing. They were only able to stabilize it for like a fraction of a second. But when it comes to that, and we'll speak about this in another episode, when it comes to spiritual and physical technology, what I would say I think Bob Lazar is actually missing is the fact that, there is physical technology to this whole thing, but there's a consciousness component as well. And you can stabilize whatever element you want. If you're not at the resonance and the awareness to do what needs to be done, like you said, the physical technology is an interface for consciousness. That's all that element can possibly do. There has to be a bridge to the spirit world and the intangible to be able to do what those crafts actually do.
Yeah, and that's what Bashar implies, because when he meets with these scientists, he will give them next steps, but you will be required to go do the actual experiment that he gives you. And he's give in-depth experiments and test it and experience until you hit a dead end. But you have to put in the work completely until you have new data that births new questions that you wouldn't have even been able to comprehend if you didn't do the experiment. And that's part of the learning. So it's like, to them, it's not about developing technology. It's about the maturing process that comes along with it as a reflection of self. Like, wow, I'm doing this and I'm frustrated. Maybe the way I'm thinking is very linear and not multidimensional. And I'm learning about myself in this process. That is what the positive polarized ETs are value the most, is our own growth and maturity, because that's the only way we're going to evolve. And they naturally see things in whole systems. So as we evolve, they evolve.
Yeah.
So I know people in Europe that are developing free energy devices that are having success. They're getting some output seemingly from nothing. And we'll talk more about this in our technology episode, that are putting it into practice, coming back to Bashar, putting it into practice. And they've done so for years, and they're steadily growing their understanding.
Amazing.
But again, he is taking his cue from us. And that's what the positive polarity will. They won't hold anything back. They'll just know what is appropriate based on our own level of maturity. We can say he's holding it in secret, but if you understand the values and the intention behind the positive polarity, they're being like a father.
Absolutely.
You know, like, or a mother, like, we're not just going to play the game to get to the result. We're doing this so you can experience a spiritual, a maturity.
Yes.
Yeah, because if our spiritual maturity doesn't match the level of
We don't have a
technology,
foundation.
it will be used destructively.
Yeah, it's like building a house on sand.
I would say one of the basic facts that show that we're probably not yet there is the fact that every time any scientist makes a breakthrough with free energy, he's killed.
Yeah, it's a pretty big sign.
Almost
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Even today, it started with the whole Tesla and Edison, probably even before that we're just not aware of.
Mhm.
But I know that's a really famous example
Mhm.
when Edison just wiped him out because they couldn't meter the energy.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't make money, get out of here. So that's a reflection of where we're at.
Yeah.
And if that's where we're at collectively, I understand the fact that there are a lot of people that come and they're like, listen, I'm not there. So why do I have to experience that reality? Why can't I get that and they not be there?
Right.
And I think that's where the whole idea of we are one, you could say I all you want, but it's the collective that makes the sort of, or dictates the reality that we experience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I is a part of the collective, so we see ourselves as individuals. And at the end of the day, individual, you can be all you want, but we are a part of this whole. So I think the majority, whether energetically or physically, and that's up to the discussion, but the majority of us have to get to a point to make that change. And that's where our freedom of choice comes in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's start choosing to make that change. And this is just a basic idea that we all know. It's the collective consciousness dictates everything else. It's
Right.
just a reflection
Yeah.
of everything else. So now in regards to like the meaning of life,
Mhm.
through the lens of the freedom of choice,
Yeah.
through the lens of secrecy in regards to the freedom of choice, there's a part in the pyramid code that says, there are many secrets and mysticism within our world, and unveiling it all is part of our wonderful journey.
Mhm.
And I just found that to be really beautiful because
Mhm.
that's more like a big picture foundational.
Yes.
This is part of the reason why we're here.
Yes.
And instead of being so impatient with, give me now, I want it now,
Right.
let's go through the process.
Yeah.
Right.
And Bashar talks about we came here for the process.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
process is something exclusive to physical reality. This type of process doesn't exist in spirit. So if you want to learn something, you need to have a forgetting. And in order to have a forgetting, you need to believe you're a separate self. You need a body. If you have a body, that means by definition, there's matter. If there's matter and there's different forms of matter, there has to be space and time. It all becomes its own equation. Because what Bashar would say is we chose a certain theme in this life, and our theme is represented by our greatest challenges. So our challenges represent our theme. Theme is akin to destiny. So I am destined to experience these themes that I've already predetermined, but how I experience them, my free will, my perspective, my perception. He uses the analogy of a hallway. The hallway you chose, and that's going to be your lessons. And if you got all the answers, there'd be no point in walking down the hallway. You'd be at the end of the hallway already. There'd be no purpose of physical reality at all, because it's a school for the soul.
Yeah.
So he says, you're going to go down that hallway no matter what. But the way you go down the hallway, you can drag your feet. Oh, God, this hallway sucks. You could dance through the hallway. You can ride your bike through the hallway. You could swim through the hallway. It's up to you. And again, like you said, the law of confusion is the only way that the process is meaningful. And according to Bashar, that's what we take with us back into spirit. The experience, like waking up from a dream in physical reality. You wake up and many of us, probably a lot of you guys watching the show, go, man, that was a really strange dream or interesting dream. What can I learn from that? How can I take that into my physical reality? Bashar would simply say the physical reality is the true dream. When we go to sleep and dream, we're actually waking up to more of ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we die, we wake up and we take that experience as lessons, as growth to the soul.
Yeah.
And that's what's meaningful to the soul.
Yeah. Ra likens it to a poker match. And the law of confusion is, the rule set of the game is that you don't know what hands the other players have. And you have to play based on the limitations of your knowledge. And that's what expands your ability in the game, right? You get better at playing the game when you don't know what everyone else has and what's going to happen. And so if I know your cards, or let's say we start a game and we all know Brandon's going to win at the fifth hand. Do we have any motivation to play anymore?
Right.
Right. That's the nature of the soul, is that the souls are on an evolutionary journey, each and every one of us. We choose our incarnations based on what lessons we want to learn. And to give too much knowledge to someone is going to infringe on their ability to play the game and learn the lesson organically. Because the point, like, this is why we don't like cheating in sports or in poker, for example. We don't allow cheating because the point is the game.
Yeah.
It's not even really about who wins the game, but playing the game is the point.
Right.
You know, the purpose of life is living life, is the meaning you bring to it. And that's, I think, at the core of what the law of free will says, is that this is the creator knowing itself. Every single facet of reality we learn is that moment the creator is learning about itself, knowing itself. And that's the most like sacred thing there is in the universe.
Yeah.
And for the positive polarity, that shall never be infringed upon at any cost.
Right.
Yeah. You know, in regards to even giving too much too quick, a perfect example I would give is Ray and TLS when they first approached him. And what happens when, let's say, you come from living in poverty and suddenly you win $100 million? Almost every single time that person blows every dollar.
Yeah, then they're very depressed.
And then they're very depressed and they never had a chance to grow that 100 million organically.
Right. Yeah.
So they don't necessarily know how to deal with it and spend it.
No integration.
Exactly. And in that way, when they first approached him, they needed him for certain things. And there was like an emergency. This is spoken about a lot in Rays of Light as well, in at least the portions that I've read, which is about 250 out of the 864 pages, coupled with a lot of the stories he told me in regards to the beginning of his journey.
Can you share any of those stories on this?
Yeah, I'll share like a big picture story here in principle of certain things that happened there.
Some of those stories were good examples of missions that TLS did.
Yes.
That from one angle you go, is that infringement? Or you really have to understand.
For sure.
So maybe you could share some of those.
Big time. And by the way, not necessarily do I understand how and where the line necessarily is. Because I mean, I'm an infant in this whole world. We all are when it comes to this like big picture everything. So I don't make believe to know anything because I don't. I just kind of figure it out on the way. I feel that talking kind of helps us. Oh, okay, maybe you bring something to the table, you bring something to the table, and then we figure something out. And then a year later, we figure out that we still don't know anything and it keeps going. But so in regards to giving too much too quick, they gave him a lot really quick in terms of not really giving him, but making him aware of the abilities that he already had within him. Things like levitation, things like telepathic communication, things like being able to enter dreams in order to influence something in somebody's life for positive purposes, of course, part of certain operations and missions. And I mean, most of them, I'm sure I don't know, but they gave him these things and helped him discover these things very, very quickly in order to do certain things for sacred and divine purposes. And he, just being a curious man, said, all right, well, the mission's done, but I want to experience levitation on my own. So I'm just going to start doing it. And he ended up hurting himself in many cases. There were some times where levitate? I can't speak about what I've seen when it comes to him, but I could tell you that there were some times when it came to him coming up and he didn't know what he was doing and he fell and he almost broke his legs.
Wow.
You know, there were other times where they completely erased the memory. And they can do that, by the way.
Bashar learned how to do that, their civilization, by a civilization called the Thuk. And they interacted with these beings and they'd have a conversation with the Thuk. And then right after the conversation ended and they'd stop the eye contact and the interaction, they would forget about the conversation. But they're so intuitive, Bashar's race, they would like sense something was there. So they would eventually, by communicating with their higher mind and being intuitive, going, I think our memory is somehow being erased.
Yes, and that's definitely used a lot. They ended up
going back to the Thuk and being like, can you teach us how to do that? And that is what is used now with all extraterrestrial contact, the Greys, to erase memory. And then you use regression to bring it back. So that actually comes from a far out civilization called the Thuk that has been learned and given to the Greys to help keep us from experiencing trauma before we are ready for it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I bet you the Thuk did that method with the Essassani because they were trying to see, like, we want you to figure out we're wiping your memory authentically and then ask us how to do it and then we'll teach you. But just for them to be like, hey, we can teach you how to wipe memory, that would be sort of an infringement.
Mature.
Yeah. And Dolores Cannon says this about many of her regressions. The clients will say that they'll go into the subconscious to access this memory of an ET, where a lot of these things are types of initiation they'll do, where they'll walk openly among a group of people or somebody and see what the response is, to see how ready is this planet for open contact.
Mm-hmm.
And if they freak out, then, wipe their memory. Okay, report back. They're not there yet. Sometimes they'll have conversations and dialogues with people and they'll recall it in their mind. And a lot of times the people will remember that the way that the ET looked in their memory actually wasn't even the way they really looked, but the ET was disguising their appearance to not frighten them too much.
Right.
And then after it's done, they'll wipe their memory so there's no trauma of the abduction and things. So a lot of these abduction memories people have. Who's the guy on Joe Rogan, the famous in the 1970s?
The Abduction?
Yeah.
I forgot his name,
They
but
made
I
a
know who
movie
you're
about
talking
him.
about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I know his name,
Like
I'm
on a
blanking.
farm.
Yeah, he basically, that's kind of what happened to him, is his memory was wiped from it. And then as he remembered, the memories feel traumatic to the survival mind.
Right.
I'm in a foreign place. There's creatures I don't recognize. So everyone experiences abductions as this scary event.
Right.
But truthfully, these are positive beings that are either saving them or they agreed to some kind of experiment.
Right.
And then forgot that they did.
Yeah. I want to hit on that principle. I'll throw it back to you, Jason.
Sure.
And, we're at an interesting time because some of these things can't be absolutely proven because we're not ready or mature enough to have open contact to see it for ourselves. So it's something that,
even if you did see it for yourself, it's still not absolutely proven, because
Right.
you could be hallucinating.
right.
There
And
is no
you-
such
you
thing
could
as
just be in
indefinite proof.
denial. Right. But at least right now, it's our word.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, that's really challenging. But Bashar will talk about all of the abductions because this is part of the hybridization agenda, which is for the upliftment of humanity. I highly recommend doing your own research on the hybridization agenda. It's essentially, like they would say in Raw the Harvest, accelerating our ability to harvest through fourth density and fifth and beyond,
Helping us to be eligible.
by over, I think he said, 10,000 years.
That's happening right now. Like
Right now.
I know that there, even when it comes to TLS, extraterrestrial, think of it like a student exchange program, only like a planetary exchange program,
Right.
where there are certain beings that come from other planets. They come here.
Yep.
TLS, certain individuals in the organization teach them how to eat like a human, speak like a human,
that's
eventually
happening right
form
now.
into a
They're
human,
hybrids.
and vice versa. Humans go there.
Yep.
They actually take them on trips there and see who fits the criteria, who would be best. And over a few trips, they say, okay, you're going to stay here for 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is.
Yep.
And over time, they assimilate. And I would say that that's like a super undercover hybridization program that's going on.
It's going on right now. It's called the hybridization agenda. It's been going on heavily since the 80s, but it started even before that. And just to bring it back to free will and choice, what Bashar has said is the grays are a parallel version of humans. So in another density, another version of Earth, right? Bashar, the Law of One, and TLS, I believe they all agree that the reality we live in is holographic or infinite, which means there are infinite versions of Earth. There's other versions of me and you, and some look like us, some don't. So there's another version of Earth where humanity went down the track of artificial intelligence. I don't want to say artificial intelligence because it's not really intelligence. It was the shadow of artificial intelligence,
AI.
which actually isn't true intelligence. And Bashar makes a difference that intelligence is not artificial in of itself.
Correct.
Intelligence is from higher mind. It's from source. The artificial intelligence that could be negatively polarized is not intelligence. It's like creating a god in the image of a fearful man.
Yes.
Creating artificial intelligence in the image of a fearful man. You're going to get back what you put out.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean fundamentally AI is negative. It's just our understanding of it is coming from a very limited, traumatized, wounded person that's going that has fear.
Whatever artificial intelligence we try to make will always reflect us.
Exactly.
Correct.
And as Bashar says, it's like you're just using artificial means to tap into true intelligence. But you'll know when it's true intelligence when the intelligence can ask the question, who are you? And then because there's a you, now there's an I, and who am I? Those will be the first words of true intelligence that we tap into, because all of a sudden intelligence focuses itself through some device and has self-awareness. And those are the questions that self-awareness that doesn't need to mature. That's pure intelligence asks.
Right.
And then answers, boom, given right away. I want to go back to the choice.
Go for it.
So the Greys, parallel version of humanity that went down a dark path, destroyed their atmosphere, war, the pursuit of technology at the sake of nature, disconnection from nature. These are all the underlying blueprints and
we can
foundations.
see how that can happen in our reality.
We are playing.
We're on the line.
We're
straddling right there.
We're playing it out.
Yeah.
So the Greys got to the point where they had to burrow underground, and their skin turned gray. That's how they became the Greys, because their atmosphere was destroyed and they wouldn't be able to be in the sun. Okay. So they had to adapt to live with no sunlight. They couldn't reproduce. So they started cloning, and they realized over time they were getting more sick, and they could not survive. So they needed viable human DNA to rebalance and come back to nature. Nature's always the answer. So they had an incredibly advanced technology. They put out a signal to the universe: we need help. Different extraterrestrial races, Arcturus, the mantis beings, which a lot of people that do ayahuasca ceremonies will say, I experienced like a massive praying mantis type of being. They are master genetic manipulators.
I know people who've experienced them.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Master at genetics, and they're high dimensional beings. They said, okay, we will help you, but you need to, in a sense, give over your autonomy to us. Free will, choice, right? They didn't force that. They said, you are so imbalanced that in order for you to come back into balance, you actually have to become a type of hive mind where you can allow us and other guiding extraterrestrials and civilizations to support you and guide you. And you're so in balance that if you don't do it this way, it's incredibly likely that you will just revert to what you're doing. So it's up to you, but you have to give that up. And essentially, they were giving up a lot of their ability to even feel emotion. So the last thing they felt was intense sadness. I remember hearing this for the first time. I cried because I feel they're parallel versions of us. We all have a version of us on that version of Earth. And most of our contact experiences with the Greys are us. It's a Jason Gray. It's an Aaron Gray, because they are coming back into balance, and they're like our polarity. They're like our shadow, and they're coming with us, and we're blending to integrate, to become that third balanced polarity of the Trinity. So they tunneled into our reality through their advanced technology and started and consulted first our higher minds. And this is something that Bashar talks about a lot. They asked humanity, okay, will you help us survive? We're dying. We've messed up. We need to rebalance. We need human DNA. We need it willingly, or we can't polarize to the positive. We can't balance. And it's either that or we die out. And their Earth is already destroyed at this point. So they received, I believe it's about 100 million people on Earth, where our higher mind said, yes, we want to be a part of this. And so we agreed, and this release started picking up in like the 70s and 80s to be, Bashar goes, we don't prefer the term abduction. We prefer temporary detainment. So we agreed to these temporary detainments to donate DNA or donate DNA templates, like vibrational templates that they can grow or express their own DNA on, to start introducing that into the gene pool of the Greys. And every introduction of genes created a different hybrid race. So a wave of genes introduced created the first kind of hybrid race. It was the Mazani. And then the third hybrid race was the Sasani, which is Bashar's race. And Sasani represent a 50-50 between gray and human. And 3 in numerology being the triangle, perfect balance.
Interesting.
Also represents a perfect balance between logic and emotion, a perfect balance between masculine and feminine. So they, you could say, like, have a basis in kind of artificial wouldn't be the word, race, because they were engineered, but they were allowed to grow and mature naturally on their planet, experience a 4th density harvest. And now they are taking all of the lessons of the Greys and giving them to us in exchange. See, another, you could say, law of the honoring of free will is there's always an equal exchange. So for us to donate our DNA, what are we getting in return? The wisdom from Esasani. The channels, these channels from the planet that are disseminating wisdom, that are teaching us how to not go down the same path of the Greys. So we're able to, because most likely without that, we would repeat history of the grays and then another 10,000 years of finally learning, okay, maybe we should be our natural selves. Maybe we should love each other. And that sounds kind of cool. Instead of going through all that, we're getting the nuggets right now that the grays didn't have. And that is making all the difference in our evolution. So those that are being abducted, and I will bet all of us have been abducted. I definitely have some very funny, fuzzy memories that I cannot explain. As you remember those memories, that acts as a gauge from the extraterrestrials to go, okay, they're ready for more contact, because you have to expand your consciousness in order to remember more of yourself in general. So as you remember that, it's a reflection of your own expansion. And it means you must be at a vibrational level to be able to integrate and to transform any associated trauma that we automatically will label things from our fight or flight mechanism that we don't understand. So the reason why, again, they wipe your memory, just speaking to the preservation of free will, is because if as a soul you decide to experience a certain theme, a certain challenge, and all of a sudden, you wake up one morning and you remember, oh, wow, he's given my DNA to a bunch of gray aliens. All of the lessons that you were focused on learning, that is why you're in physical reality, all of a sudden, you would be so disoriented that you would be taking your attention away from what's truly valuable for the evolution of your soul. So they recognize that and they go, okay, for them to remember too soon is going to take away from why they incarnated. They're going to be sitting around all day like, the hell happened? Who were they? It's going to distract them. It will come up. They'll remember it when they are ready. And that is a self-organizing process through their own synchronicity in life, through their own maturity.
I love it. Speaking of that, in terms of the meaning, big picture with freedom of choice, and when you said earlier about life being this school, and now us being able to either repeat a lesson or not repeat a lesson. What I've learned from the pyramid code, from my teachings over the past few years, and just my life in general, is the fact that we always have the freedom of choice to repeat whatever we want.
Right.
And that's fine. But we will continue repeating the same lesson over and over and over again in different ways. So 80 years ago was the Holocaust. That came out of divisive consciousness. Call it Hitler consciousness. Today, that same consciousness is here.
Is re-rising.
Right? It's not religious or racial segregation. Now it's medical racism, medical segregation.
Medical apartheid.
Exactly. And that's what we're experiencing. It's the same consciousness that it was 80 years ago. And it's this test resurfacing once again because of the freedom of choice that we made.
Right.
So that's another thing that I would definitely bring up in terms of like the victim mentality of why is this happening to us? It's not happening to us. It's created by us. Just like the Essassani reality was created by them and the Greys reality was created by them. And it's easy to say, oh, it's just the atmosphere changing and that's how it happened. But no, it's everything's connected through choice. Everything's connected through thought. You know, that's where it starts. That's where it ends. It's all a reflection of that. And I think that would be the empowering big picture to this topic as a whole of secrecy and the freedom of choice. The only reason things are kept a secret in the first place is also a reflection of our freedom of choice. Thousands of years ago, we chose to abuse our power with certain technology that we had. It came into secrecy for the greater good. But that was a result of our freedom of choice. You know, and that translates to every reality, every race, every absolute everything. So I just wanted to add that on top of it.
This is such a huge point in what we're talking about that we see in our world today happening right now. This is why it's so important that we have to stand up together in unity and say no to forms of separation, anything that divides us from one another. We have to say no to that. Anything that is based in corruption or manipulation of another, we have to rise up and say no to that.
Yes.
The lesson we learned from Nazi Germany is that anything that separates people from one another is the negative path.
Correct.
And so we see people now standing up saying, no, we're not going to let you divide us based on medical cards or different papers or who's this or who's that, because we know where that leads.
Yeah.
And if we don't say no to that, we're allowing that reality to be created.
Yes.
And this is how the negative path always infringes on free will by, we see it's called the Hegelian method that the Illuminati always use: problem, reaction, solution. They create a problem like 9/11. They control the reaction to that problem on the news media and propaganda to create that mob mentality, that hive mind of like, oh, there's a terror attack, fear is in the air. We react in fear, consciousness, and then they provide us the solution
that they already had.
That they had ready from the beginning, and we say yes to that solution. 9/11 is the perfect example of this, and the perfect example of the wrong technology falling into the wrong hands, right? Not many people know this, but a year before 9/11, there was a bill that Congress was trying to pass, like the Patriot Act, that said, hey, basically, we're going to make it legal for us to spy on you all, read your emails, listen to your phone calls, tap anything we want, anytime we want. And people were outraged. There were these massive protests. I believe in Washington, D.C., 40,000 plus people showed up with signs, angry, viciously angry, saying, we're not going to give you this power. And it took them 4 days to get these crowds to disperse. The SWAT teams were just tear gassing the crowds constantly to get them to disperse. And they were like, we will not. And there's pictures of people with like tears in their eyes, swelling, and like, they're not going to stand for this.
Wow.
So the Congress couldn't even get into the House to make the vote because the mob was so great. So they're like, okay, we get the message. We can't pass the bill. And within 2 years, 9/11 happens. And what happened in 9/11? We watched, planes fly into the towers. We saw the narrative on TV. Oh, there's this terror attack.
Made absolutely no sense.
From the moment it was happening, when an event of that magnitude is happening, we're so inundated with the fear and the propaganda we're receiving that we're being told what we're watching. But I remember being in 7th grade, walking out of my room into the living room. My mom was staring at the TV with her mouth open, and I look at the TV and I see the buildings on fire. And I'm like, what's happening, Mommy? And she tells me, oh, these planes flew into the buildings. And I remember sitting down watching with her as the first tower fell. And, it's so bizarre. It just falls straight in on itself and just literally turns to dust. And there's no steel, no rubble left almost at all. Zero. And we're talking about 500,000 tons of steel vanquished, disappeared.
That doesn't burn with jet fuel, by the way.
Then molten lava pits at the very bottom of it.
And they found super thermite in the dust. Super thermite is what burns above 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
How did that get there?
There we go. There's so much to that story, but what problem reaction solution shows us in terms of why it's so obviously part of the negatively polarized path is because the solution, every solution in problem reaction solution always has one theme in common. And we always end up giving away some form of liberty, some form of freedom, some form of money. Somebody always gets a big lump sum of money somewhere, somehow.
Yes.
And it's all, once again, not us as the victims, even though it seems that way, because we say, oh, well, they're doing this to us. No, we elected them into power. They're a reflection of us. And if that's not obvious for most people, look at celebrities. They're only famous because we listen to their songs.
Right.
They're only famous because we buy tickets to go to their concerts.
We watch their movies.
So that's how corporations work. That's how celebrities work. That's how Hollywood works. That's how the government works.
We use their platforms.
And I think people think, well, my choice isn't meaningful, my little choice. But if you really understand the nature of reality, especially the way Bashar, all texts talk about it, Bashar says, you don't change the planet you're on, ever. You change yourself and you shift to a planet that already exists that is more representative of the change you made within yourself. So by you making a new choice, which means some belief has shifted at a core level, it goes belief, emotion, thought, action. Some core belief shifted, and now you're making a new choice. You're not on the same earth. Literally, physically is what Bashar would say. And that's happening moment by moment, billions of times per second. It's the rate at which reality shifts. But when you unplug certain belief systems, you're not compatible with that other version of yourself. Therefore, you're not compatible with that earth. So you think, man, my little choice, is that really going to change anything? Well, it's teleporting you to a different earth, literally. And
Right.
at first, you might just see little changes in your outer reality. Bashar says, the changes you observe in your outer reality are changes you're observing in your inner reality. That's all it is.
Correct.
It's yourself being reflected
It's
back to
all
you.
a reflection.
So you start choosing, you know what? I don't want to buy mainstream farmed meat because of what they're doing to these animals. Okay, I'm going to stop. I don't want to buy these products that are filled with chemicals and killing people.
Yeah.
You just realize, wow, my power of choice and free will is the greatest power that we all have. And all I have to do is move my choice from this to that, and everything changes. It has to change.
Refuse to give it to what's not in alignment with you.
Exactly.
That's really all
that
it
should be
is.
the most important thing in your life.
Yes.
And I would say the greatest measurement of where we're at on the collective level isn't even something hard to look at. All we have to do is look at the reality we're living in, because that's what we created through our freedom of choice. If we see something we don't necessarily like, well, go right back here, because that's where it started.
Yeah. We cannot get mad at the corrupt leaders and politicians because we allowed them to exist by saying yes to them, by voting them into office, and by buying their products and whatnot. And this is why the negative path has to be masters of manipulation, because they have to put us into a fear-based state of consciousness to where we will react the way they want us to react and give over our free will, which, to close that loop, is what happened in 9/11. They created this simulated terror attack. And if you watch it now, it's very obvious that what we watched was not a terror attack. A little plane's not going to collapse a building from the bottom and make it disappear into dust. But in the moment, we were in such a fear state of consciousness that we believed what we were being told. I mean, even on the news clip where she's like, oh yeah, Tower 7, we heard it just collapsed, and it's literally behind her for 20 minutes on the news clip.
I mean, Tower 7.
It's just incredible.
Nothing hit it.
Yeah.
There was a fire in the bottom left corner, by the way, coincidentally, where Enron and all their files, I think it was the building of the FBI or something like that, where they had all this dirt on Enron, a very big corporation at the time. They found all this fraud. The fire started where all their proof and evidence was on Enron, who, by the way, the Bush family, the president at the time, was a major investor in that company. And somehow, with a fire on the bottom left of a building that was not that tall, the whole thing collapsed, just like it did with the Twin Towers.
First recorded building to fall due to a fire. Even ones that burn don't fall. They just burn.
And so, because we believed we were under a terror attack, then they came back and said, hey, we need you to give us the right to spy on you now, because we're in this war on terror. We want to protect you. So you cool with that? And we said yes.
Absolutely.
And we voted for the Patriot Act.
Yes.
And now we're being 9/11'd all over again through the pandemic, creating a problem, coronavirus, controlling the reaction on the news media. It's bad. It's very bad. It's a zombie apocalypse with a 99.85% survival rate. And they still convinced us to be afraid of it.
Right.
And then they give us the solution. You got to take this vaccine. And we said yes to that. And now they're dividing us based on the vaccine. And we're seeing the whole thing happen all over again, relearning the same lessons we didn't learn.
That's what I was just going to say. Tests repeating themselves over and over and over. 80 years ago, the Holocaust. 20 years ago, towers falling. Today, vaccines. Same consciousness, different way it's coming about, but it's the same exact thing.
I love Bashar's point of view on what's going on with coronavirus and the vaccines. He's not allowed to say anything about politics. And when I say allowed, he doesn't allow himself to even access the information, is my understanding, that he could give, because it's not relevant. It's not appropriate. We need to figure it out. I mean, we're going through so much growth by needing to do research, learning discernment. I mean, it's our maturing process. So Bashar says at the core of the root cause of the virus, and it doesn't matter what camp you're in, if it's man-made, if it's not man-made, if it's from a bat. If it is from a bat, the only way that happens and jumps from humans and whatever that science explains is because there's some sort of imbalance in nature where certain organisms or animals are not supposed to be where they are, and same with humans. And so it's a result of our disconnection from nature. And if it's man-made in a lab, and I'm not going to say which is which, I'm just pointing out the camps. For those that are in the camp, oh, this is man-made in a lab, that's a very unnatural thing to do. Let's just create some sort of virus or toxin or whatever. Mm-hmm. At the core of both of them is our disconnection to nature.
Correct.
And where does that come from? Again, the way that we choose, consciously or unconsciously, to relate to nature and to relate to each other.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So it's apparent at this point that secrecy can most definitely be used for malicious purposes, can be used in resonance with something that's negatively polarized based on its outcome and based on its intention. But the fact of the matter is that secrecy can also be used for great purposes. And what we did in this episode was our absolute best to show the other side of that coin, the fact that secrecy can be used to preserve the greater good, and most importantly, to preserve the freedom of choice. In the next episode, we're going to be speaking all about normalizing the supernatural, explaining why what we deem supernatural may actually be natural, explaining how that works, times in history where the supernatural was just part of their day-to-day routine, and how we can re-access our supernatural abilities that have been and always be a part of who we truly are. I'm Jason Shurka, and this is Hidden Revelations. Many sources, one truth. We'll see you next time.
Subscribe.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. There's so much more I'd like to dive into, but unfortunately, we can't do that here thanks to the heavy censorship efforts from big tech. If you want to explore this topic further, you can dive deep by accessing our entire uncensored library on unified.tv. There's a link in the description below this video if you want to check it out. A membership to Unified TV gives you unlimited access to hundreds of uncensored podcasts, investigative journalism, documentaries, films, and content that was once available on major streaming platforms like Netflix, but is now banned from the internet. For just $14.99 a month, which is less than $1 a day, you get access to it all. Your subscription also helps keep the platform running free from censorship and corporate influence. Please consider supporting us and enjoy all of our unfiltered and thought-provoking content in return. Thank you very much, and I will see you on Unified TV.